All right, let's talk about one of the darkest, most enduring legends in American history, the story of H. Holmes. You've probably heard of him and his infamous so-called murder castle, right in the heart of 19th century Chicago. So picture this. It's 1893. Chicago is throwing the party of the century, the World's Columbian Exposition. It's this incredible, gleaming white city, a symbol of progress and hope. But, just a few miles from all that brightness, a very different story was unfolding, which really brings us to the central question, doesn't it? I mean, the contrast is just wild. On one side, you have the White City, this absolute marvel that drew in over 27 million people, all looking to the future. And on the other, you have this predator, this dark shadow, who was using all that hope and excitement for his own twisted games. It's this clash that's so key to understanding how this all happened. So you've got to wonder, how did the fair itself actually create the perfect conditions for a killer? Let's really get into how the chaos of it all allowed someone like Holmes to do what he did, totally unnoticed. See, the fair wasn't just some convenient backdrop. It was basically an engine that powered Holmes's crimes. I mean, think about it. You have this massive flood of people, which creates a sea of anonymity. So many young women were flocking to the city looking for jobs, totally alone, with no one to look out for them. And back then, society kind of had this unspoken hierarchy of concern. Some people, well, they could just vanish, and nobody would raise much of a fuss. A city full of people coming and going, it's a predator's dream come true. Okay, now let's get to the part of the story everybody thinks they know. The main event, the terrifying murder castle, this labyrinth supposedly built for the sole purpose of killing. But what if I told you that the legend itself is the building's biggest lie? Yeah, let's just put it right out there, no messing around. The whole story of this diabolical hotel, designed to trap and murder hundreds of tourists, it's a myth. A really good one, for sure, but a myth, mostly cooked up by the newspapers of the day. This is the picture the press painted for everyone, right? This maze of hallways that led to brick walls, soundproof rooms with gas jets piped in, trapdoors that sent people plunging into a basement filled with acid vats and a crematorium. I mean, it is literally the stuff of nightmares, a factory built for murder. And the body count? Oh, the papers had a field day. They threw around numbers as high as 200 people. That's how the legend of America's most prolific serial killer was born. But the truth? Well, it's something else entirely. And what's so fascinating is when you actually dig into the historical record, the whole myth just collapses. For one thing, the building was never really a functioning hotel for tourists. And its bizarre, confusing layout, that wasn't for trapping victims, it was for hiding stolen furniture from creditors. The gas jets were just standard gaslighting for the time. And that basement? Yeah, it had a big furnace, like any building that size would, and dissecting tables, but that's because Holmes was selling skeletons to medical schools. No torture racks, no acid vats. So here's the bottom line. The building was basically a physical version of Holmes's greed, not his bloodlust. It was a castle of lies. It was all designed to run huge scams, confuse the people building it so he wouldn't have to pay them, and hide all the stuff he bought on credit. The murders? They were a terrible, brutal side effect of his real obsession: money. Okay, so now that we've kind of torn down the myth of the castle, the real horror of the story starts to come into focus. So let's talk about the actual victims, because this is where the story becomes a much more personal and honestly a much more chilling tragedy. The real number of victims, confirmed or highly likely, isn't 200. It's 9. 9 individual people whose only mistake was trusting H. Holmes. And this is what's so important to understand. Holmes didn't hunt anonymous strangers at the fair. No, he preyed on people who were tangled up in his life. People who knew him, who worked for him, who loved him. Every single murder was personal, it was calculated, and it was always about greed or just covering his tracks. Let's just take Julia Connor. She was the wife of a man who worked for Holmes, and she became his mistress. Well, she and her little 6-year-old daughter, Pearl, they just vanished right before Christmas in 1891. Holmes later admitted that Julia died during an abortion he was performing on her, and then he poisoned little Pearl to keep her quiet. The skeletal remains of a small child later found in the basement are just a haunting reminder of that confession. And the pure terror of his methods, it's just unbelievable. This quote here, it refers to the last desperate act of his fiancée, a woman named Emmeline Cigrand. After he got all her money, he locked her inside a huge, airtight bank vault he had on the second floor of the building and just left her there to suffocate. That faint footprint, that was the only trace she left of her final terrified moments. So you have to be wondering, how does a guy this smart, this careful, finally get caught? Well, it wasn't because of some fantastical murder castle. It was a simple insurance scam that brought the whole house of cards down. So after Holmes murdered his business partner Benjamin Peitzel for a $10,000 insurance policy, he took 3 of Peitzel's kids with him. A detective from Philadelphia, Frank Gear, started this absolutely relentless hunt. He used letters the kids had written to their mom to painstakingly retrace Holmes's journey across the country. And his amazing police work led him first to a cellar in Toronto, where he found the bodies of 2 of the children, Alice and Nellie. Then he followed the trail to a chimney in Indianapolis, where he found the charred remains of their little brother, Howard. But here's the thing about Holmes. Once he was caught, he didn't just fade away. Oh no, he stepped right into the spotlight and became the lead architect of his own monstrous legend. This was his final performance. While he was waiting to be executed, he pulled off his very last con. He sold a wild, sensational confession to the Hearst newspapers for $7,500, which was a fortune back then. That confession, plus his over-the-top performance at what they were calling the trial of the century, that was his final act. And in that paid confession, man, he gave the public exactly the villain they wanted. He completely leaned into the myth, he exaggerated his crimes, and he sealed his own legend with these famous words. He wasn't just confessing, he was crafting a character for the history books. But for all that bravado, his final request tells you everything you need to know. The man who had dissected and destroyed so many human bodies had one last wish. He wanted his own casket to be filled with cement and buried 10 feet deep. The great dissector was terrified that someone might do to his body what he had done to so many others. And that really brings us to the final thought here, doesn't it? The legend of the murder castle is scary, for sure, but it also kind of lets us keep the horror at a distance. The reality? Well, the reality is maybe even more disturbing, because the greatest evil isn't always a monster in some custom-built castle. Sometimes it's the charming, respectable person right in front of you, the one you'd never suspect, who sees other people as nothing more than pawns in their game.
And so, another chapter closes. For more journeys into history's forgotten files, please like and subscribe. Your next story awaits.